Did you know that only 60% of seniors aged 65 and older use the internet, with many struggling to navigate the complexities of social media and online care platforms? In today's hyper-connected world, where 89% of American adults use the internet and 58% of World Health Organization member states have implemented digital health strategies, the ability to navigate online platforms is crucial, especially in healthcare. With the surge in telemedicine and health apps, patients and providers are facing new challenges in digital literacy. Our guest today will shed light on how we can bridge the digital divide and ensure safe, high-quality, patient-centered care in this increasingly digital landscape. Welcome to Aging Together, a podcast dedicated to exploring the challenges and opportunities of caring for our aging communities. I'm your host, Dr. Pooja Ashok Patel, an occupational therapist with specialty certifications in geriatric care, dementia, and fall prevention. In this podcast, I interview guests who are experts in their fields or can share their experiences with caregiving. Together with the guest speakers, we dive into a wide range of topics, including health and wellness, care planning, caregiving, and more. I hope you'll join me on this journey. Let's navigate aging together. Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Pooja, and you're listening to Aging Together. This month, we're diving into digital literacy. To review this topic, I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Vikram Pagpatan. Vic is an assistant professor and admissions coordinator for the SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University MSOT program in New York, and has over 10 years of experience as an occupational therapist, practicing through a lifespan approach with specialties in adult neurological disorders, congenital pediatric neuromotor conditions, and assistive technology focused on seating mobility services and augmentative and alternative communication platforms. Vic holds an AOTA Board Certification in Pediatrics, is a certified leader in academia through the AOTA, is an Assistive Technology Professional from RESNA, and was named a Fellow of the AOTA for his advocacy and leadership efforts for the profession. As a proud small business owner, Vic operates VPAT Solutions LLC, an assistive technology-focused consulting company that provides mobility, aging in place, and communication clinical and community-centered services for adults and children. Together, we're discussing topics related to social media use, safety, navigation of online care platforms, and the role of family caregivers. Please join me in welcoming Vic to the show. Hey, Vic, good morning. Thank you for joining me on the show today.
Hey, Pooja, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well,
Thank you again for spending your time here with me today. I provided a brief bio of your extensive background and experiences in working with tech, assistive tech specifically. And I know you wear a lot of hats with leadership roles and your private practice and teaching, and you're kind of doing it all. And I love it. Can you tell us more about your experiences and perhaps what your alphabet soup entails?
Sure. Well, first off, Pooja, thank you for having me. It's a wonderful platform, and it's really a well-needed resource for both in the OT community and outside of the OT community. So thank you, Pooja, for doing this. And again, such a great topic as well. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. I'm an occupational therapist by trade. In academia, I've been full-time for about 7+ years now as an assistant professor in a state University of New York institution. Clinically, I started off in adult neuro. That's where my passion was within the VA hospitals. Slowly transitioned into neuromotor pediatrics, doing that as a part of the school system and also contract work. And now I find myself sometimes very bored and sometimes in need of a challenge. So I have a company called VPAT Solutions that focuses on AT functional mobility using motorized and non-motorized wheelchairs and functional communication devices. This is for pediatrics and adults. But what's interesting, Pooja, is that since the pandemic, everything's changed, especially when it comes to the way that we look at how services are delivered. And in this case, sometimes looking at the digital context as a level playing ground for how services can be rendered in a very equitable way. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. And yeah, the alphabet soup is there, as all of us do when it comes to trying to be the very best we can for those that we work with. I have a doctorate in education from Walden University. and some board certifications in pediatrics, telepractice, and autism.
Awesome. Thank you so much for explaining all of that. Now, today's topic, we're really diving into the digital environment when it comes to older adults, and that includes not just social media, but also online care platforms as we shift a lot of our even healthcare access to online, right?
Yep.
I think the pandemic really helped kind of transition, or I should say really escalated the transition of moving a lot of healthcare online, whether it's just as simple as patient care forms, right, to actually care appointments and to even follow up and everything that it entails. And then within the therapy realm, we've been doing like exercise programs virtually, we do assessments virtually. And I think it's really important that we talk about both aspects of this, And so I think let's start with, can you explain the concept of social media competency, first of all, for older adults and why it's so important in today's digital age?
Definitely, Pooja. I mean, I think the pandemic has tried to normalize the way that we live our lives in the digital context. Some are considered to be digital natives. Some are considered to be digital immigrants or migrants. It's almost like how we use technology or how we leverage technology to complete the things that we normally would complete, except for in the digital context. The term social media competency was first originated back in 2014 by Albers. The term was situated to identify if college students understood how to use social media and if they were using social media for academic or non-academic purposes. The term now is more evolutionized to understand if social media competency is dictated around understanding the purpose of using certain platforms like Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and so forth, and also understand the technical usability of understanding how to use social media. This includes interpretation, understanding what you're looking at and if it's relevant to you, understanding reflection. Is it meaningful to what you're looking for? Or is it just more of a passive consumption of data and information? And the last thing is content generation. Are we able to contribute back to information sharing or social media? So the term competency is ever changing. It's really based upon what you're doing and where you're doing it. So again, YouTube is a lot different than, for example, doing a podcast. So it requires different levels of technical capacities.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you highlighted kind of understanding if it's relevant to you, right? There's so much information at your disposal on social media in general. And it's so important to understand if, one, is it accurate? But two, is it relevant to you, right? Does it apply to you? Because a simple piece of information might be accurate, but it might not apply to every single person the same way. I think there's the term fake news, but it's more than that, right? There's so much other incorrect information that you can get for yourself. So along those similar lines, what are some common misconceptions about older adults and their ability to use social media or online care platforms?
Sure. And I think, Pooja, to your point before, it can also be harmful in many cases where it's damaging both from a mental, emotional, and physical level if you don't quite know if the information is applicable to your particular needs situation. So that's a huge thing. Pooja, when it comes to misconceptions, and this is across the board when it comes to practitioners that are healthcare based or individuals that are looking at research from a community focus, there's a few. That older adults don't use technology. That's 100% false. There's research upon research, especially by AARP, that's saying that technology use, especially through smartphone usage or tablet usage, is increasingly huge when it comes to older adults looking at daily activities from a point of convenience or a point of access. The second aspect is that older adults are not fond or intrigued or have curiosity about social media platforms or social networking. That's also false when it comes to understanding the idea of connectedness beyond time zones, connectedness beyond geography. In many cases, again, it's a facilitator of improving mental health and wellness. And the third biggest conception is technical usability, that older adults, most of them considering to be digital immigrants, being forced to adopt technologies, are not really in tune to understanding how to use certain types of technologies. I'm not sure about you, Pooja, but for me, half my day is, if I'm at Home Depot, I'm YouTubing what I'm doing, what project I'm trying to figure out. I need to see a video, I need to pause it, I need to zoom in, and so forth. And again, research states, especially with motor learning or learning in general, having access to technology, especially through smartphone usage, is huge. And for older adults, that's supported because new learning occurs at their own pace. So from research to clinical information, there's multiple myths that, again, as if older adults are not a primary consumer of social media and digital technology, and that's 100% false.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I agree. I mean, the amount of information I've learned and the amount of times I rely on social media to teach me something, right? It's at your fingertips. It's just so easy. But also, like you mentioned, we grew up with it, right? And it's not at the same level that, let's say Gen Z grew up with it, right? But I was old enough to learn it when social media developed, right? And so I think I rely on it more than older generations probably would, but that doesn't negate the fact that it is a very good source of information if used correctly. And then also to your point, it's a form of connection. I mean, I follow so many of these older adult pages on Instagram specifically, and you see some people, some of them are having the time of their lives, right? And they're sharing it with the community. And they're really trying to just negate some of these misconceptions of older adults, right? And then you have older adults who are on social media just so that they can see what their grandkids are up to, right? And that's just, it's as simple as that when it comes to social media.
It's right. It doesn't have to be anything more complicated than understanding Google Meet, Skype, face chat, or anything else. Doesn't have to be any more technical than that. That creates that meaningfulness that they gain.
Exactly. And it also doesn't have to be a physical screen that has to be placed somewhere in your house, right? I mean, I think there's a place for that. I think it's wonderful that these like virtual photo albums exist too, right? Where we can send photos to someone's screen and it just sits there on their desk, but they might want it on the go, right? Maybe they want to be able to be involved. Like, I know I would love it if, I go on a lot of trips and if my grandma could just see what I'm doing or where I'm at, right? I just finally got my parents on Instagram. They don't post, they don't scroll through much, but they know what I'm doing, where I am, right? And they love that. They love being able to see, like, experience things that I'm experiencing through the remote world. And so I think a lot of those points you made, it really just comes down to basic connection, right?
Correct. And it's okay to be a spectator, right, Pooja? If you think about it, to your point as well, if grandma just wants to know what her granddaughter is doing, it's okay for someone to just spectate and passively consume digital media or social media. And in many cases, that also creates confidence because spectating requires attention. It requires multitasking. It requires problem solving. So, I mean, there's many ways to kind of introduce the digital immigrant to social media technology, but there's also many ways for the digital native to be much more open-minded to knowing that you don't just have to be a full-blown content creator and content, supplier to gain attention. It's almost like, again, what are you creating it for and what are you using it for? Are the two main questions that any individual across the lifespan should be asking themselves.
Absolutely. Speaking about misconceptions, I think, what are some common challenges that the older adults face when they are trying to use social media platforms and online care services?
I'll give you a clinical example, Pooja. So for me, this topic is really important, especially after the pandemic, when it came to the idea of telehealth. Telehealth and related video conferencing technologies was slowly becoming normalized as the way to kind of still resume basic operations of day-to-day life, healthcare access, appointments, consultations, basic educational transactions, right? Speaking to students, speaking to parents, and so forth. I think some of the challenges that older adults face now is slowing down and trying not to absorb and keep up with everything. There's a level of impulsivity that social media and digital media in general naturally creates, right? The need to like, the need to watch, the need to fast forward, the need to read comments. There's so many ways to engage with something that you create that it becomes overwhelming. And again, for many situations, simplicity is key. So I think one challenge that we still should be working on, whether we're caregivers, community-focused workers, or just clinicians, is understanding to kind of match the pace of the individual to what they're using in terms of social media or digital media. I just spent about 2 weeks just teaching someone how to access their emails, especially when requesting two-factor authentication or two-point authentication. That sometimes this could be tricky for someone who doesn't have their phone nearby or simply may just forget their password, especially after resetting it a couple of times. So it's almost like slowing down, not feeding into the impulsivity of having to keep up is a huge challenge for older adults. Because again, the phenomenon of fear of missing out I think goes to everyone, correct? Especially once you've consumed it and you're now a stakeholder. So you want to keep up, but you have to keep up at your own pace.
I think that's a big point. I think we talk about this a little later, but security measures, right? And that's definitely a more difficult factor for those, like you termed, digital immigrants, right? Especially if they're just trying to do the basics, like check their emails, answer some text messages, even logging into emails or having them constantly logged in. There's certain things that might come up, right?
Yeah.
So in that vein, how can social media platforms and online care services be adapted or improved to better serve the needs of older adults?
There's many ways to kind of have this conversation, Pooja, when it comes to that. But I think something more enticing now is the idea of artificial intelligence. So to not make this too controversial, the idea or the concept of chatbots, right? Those little chat sidekicks in most websites, in most apps, in most databases, that essentially is a computer with pre-programmed operated responses, looking at keywords, almost like a qualitative robot that looks at things that they're meant to look at and then respond accordingly. I think that's a great way to kind of level the playing field for using technology while still having some means of immediate support. I think one thing that many websites, many interfaces could do is incorporate a little bit more of that type of idea. Text-based and visual supports are great, but having a question answered fairly intuitively, or having, a path that you can go to based upon that response is much more indicative of real-time learning. So if I don't quite know how to use this platform for podcasting, I should be able to quickly access something that can tell me a response to my basic question. If not, then obviously a more immediate means of supports are necessary. But I think that chatbot idea or having just some type of AI inclusion in any digital interface is key, especially if you want to retain that consumer and not frustrate the hell out of them, right? So it's important to have some type of support immediately and not just a basic FAQ page that you have to go through and figure out, is that what I need?
Right. I mean, even trying to find the options for chat support are often hidden, right?
Yeah.
You have to go through multiple pages to even get to the chat support function. And so I agree with you. If there was something just like a one-click option on every single platform that you use where it's immediately goes to the chat feature, I think that would be very helpful. And I agree. The chatbot would probably be super helpful. Are there specific strategies or training programs that have been effective in teaching older adults how to use social media safely?
Oh, yeah. So as I said before, Pooja, I've been following the AARP nationally for a very long time. I think they're a great resource for understanding how to meet their consumer needs in a variety of ways. They have something called Senior Planet. It's very interesting. It's almost like they created their own MySpace, right? Their own type of platform for social media, specifically for individuals 65 plus. So this is hey, how to create an Instagram profile, how to link an Instagram profile with your Facebook account, because same owners. So things that someone would have to YouTube and hopefully get the correct YouTube presenter, the correct YouTube format video, short and sweet. They have it in their platform. I think this is something I recommend across the board. So my primary population, Pooja, are individuals with neurological conditions and individuals that are wheelchair bound or use wheelchairs as their primary means of communication. And more, parents and grandparents are asking for basic resources that are somewhat noteworthy and trustworthy. And again, AARP has been around for a very long time. They've put out research, they've collaborated with surveys and national census and research databases. This platform, Senior Planet, essentially creates these blogs and videos and tutorials for how to use different types of digital media with the mindset that the primary consumer is an older adult. So I'm totally for someone who's been around for a long time, who's vetted, but primary purpose is to give out information. So I think, again, whether you're a member or not of AARP, so far I've been linking their videos to multiple websites and social media, and it's been working perfectly fine.
That's helpful to know. I wasn't aware of the AARP program, and I think that's really important to share with others so that they can know that resource exists.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of your background, like you mentioned, is very specific to assistive technology. What role does assistive technology play in helping older adults navigate and utilize specifically social media effectively?
So Bridget, it's interesting, right? What we take for granted, for example, zooming in to an object, zooming into a piece of text, definitely compensates for a lot of visual impairments that most individuals would have. And again, for older adult populations, age-related changes happen across the board. So when it comes to AT, from a low-tech perspective and then to a high-tech perspective, everything we have now is infused with accessibility options or accessibility services. For example, the iOS systems, the Android systems, the Windows systems, all you have built-in accessibility features that mimic what for example, a child with a communication disorder would have on their tablet, what an older adult who is nonverbal or maybe who is paraplegic or quadriplegic might have on their specialized communication environmental control device. So not to get too complicated, but it's almost like everything is becoming mainstream in terms of technology. You can use your phone to open up your garage door. You can use your phone to see who's outside of your home. So when it comes to AT, again, I think low tech is always the best option compared to high tech. What I solely believe in the last number of years is to not have too many devices for too many purposes. Having a few devices that you're very comfortable with, very familiar with, to serve multiple needs is the way that AT really gets more normalized. Otherwise, if you have 15 controllers, right, for 15 different things, forget about it. It's horrible. So again, I think when it comes to AT, it's almost like just look at what you have so far. And most likely there is already an AT inclusion in that device or that interface.
Yeah, absolutely. My husband's like sole purpose or goal is to have everything on his phone.
Yeah.
Like everything from like, how we unlock our car, how we unlock our house, how we turn on our AC or heat, how we turn on our security system. Like everything's on a phone, right? And he's like, one day we won't need anything, even our like driver's licenses, our credit cards are already on our phones, right? But it's like, you still have to have a wallet because there's all these things that you can't put on your phone yet, right?
Fair. Well, Pooja, you can fly with just your phone now. So it's getting there. So to his point, the only thing we can't lose now is our phones. So if we lose our phones, it's a mess.
Yeah. And that's where, I think it's really important to also highlight that you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, right? You still have to have some sort of backup options in case something happens with your primary source. So I think that's important. And I think that's where, family caregivers or support systems can really play a role in ensuring that there's multiple levels of security when it comes to how things are being accessed, right? Like what's the accessibility to it look like? So I guess in that regard, like how can family caregivers support older adults in becoming more tech savvy and using online care platforms while also, having that oversight on security?
Pooja, you're 100% right. It's critical for caregivers to be involved in a lot of aspects of this topic. I'll give you a simple example, Pooja, that has resonated with me through, again, clinical and personal experiences. As a caregiver, as an advocate for someone who is an older adult, for example, my mother, she's 76 years old, when her physician says, oh, you can access your medications on your healthcare portal, my question immediately is, Mom, do you remember how to access your healthcare portal? When the physician or when the nurse says, did you reorder your medications? We can use services that are online based or automated services through your local pharmacy. My question is, Mom, do you remember the phone number? Do you have the phone number saved on your phone? Do you have the patience or tolerance to engage with an automated system that sometimes gets a little finicky? So I think one thing that caregivers could do in a very empathetic and humane way is to almost kind of be that unspoken voice, that invisible, devil's advocate for ensuring that technology is not a biased expectation, right? And another situation was Uber Eats, understanding how to order groceries or order food through an app that sometimes can get a little confusing. So it's almost like the world is slowly shifting to these very fast, efficient expectations through social and digital media. But the way that caregivers can truly be there for older adults is to just pause and take a step and ensure that that expectation is not just mainstreamed across the board, because that itself creates inequities and disparities. Because in many situations, the older adult may not speak up or may feel a little belittled or shy or introverted, or may not have the self-efficacy to feel like they can ask a question when it should be like, quote unquote, the obvious, right? For example. So I think that's what caregivers could do, to empathize that this is not something that should be a baseline, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even I get frustrated with the automated call system sometimes, it's like just trying to navigate. I had a situation a couple months ago where I needed to coordinate between my like health insurance and my pharmacy for like some sort of prescription coverage. And the amount of back and forth I had to do and the amount of time I spent just waiting on the automated call service and, the different options you have to pick and go through. And I was getting frustrated. And I'm like, I can't imagine an older adult trying to navigate this, on their own. It's one of those tasks that has to get done, but the way that it currently gets done is so layered and there's so many steps to it and so many back and forth. And it requires not just the patience for it, but I think also the cognitive skills for it, right? The physical skills for it too. And so I think that's a great point of why it's so important that family caregivers are involved, especially when it comes to the online care platforms.
Yes, which again could be pathways for issues to occur, both legally, financially, emotionally, and so forth. So it's almost like you're serving as a firewall between those individuals, those communities, those loved ones, and a system that is at its own speed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can just see how frustration with that can lead to someone just neglecting medication refills.
Correct.
Right? Or just saying, I'm just not going to take it because this is too much work.
It's not worth it. I'll try again tomorrow. I'll just hit 0 44 times and hoping to God that a human answers the phone. Hey, more or less. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about this a little earlier, but, about the impact of social media use and how it impacts one's mental health and just that human connection piece of it. What are the psychological and emotional benefits for older adults when they engage in social media or online care platforms?
Well, the most obvious feature are going to be social connectedness, which has been well researched across multiple disciplines and communities. Social connectedness, in its most respectful and simplest way, combats depression, combats anxiety. It looks at social isolation as a gateway issue for multiple other comorbidities that can happen for older adults who sometimes may have limitations in access to community resources. So in many ways, social connectedness is huge. Now, when it comes to social media, we often take this term as just the primary platforms to remain connected. Pinterest, YouTube, software apps or applications technically is still social media, just not in the same platform as for example, the larger Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and so forth. So again, social connectedness allows the older adult user, to remain extremely vigilant, extremely active in their own pace and in their own way. We said this before, they don't have to be active users or consumers. They can be spectators or passive users, and that's perfectly fine. Just on the flip side of positives, the only negative would be, again, across the board, would be addiction or overusage. In many cases, we said this before, but with age-related changes, mental stamina and obviously physical stamina, but mental stamina can be impaired. It's something to be mindful of. Again, that vigilance has a fuel tank. So, opening doors to sharing HIPAA-related sensitive information with individuals, sharing images that may not be 100% confidential or privacy-based is still a problem across the board, whether it's young adults or older adults. So again, I think everyone, the entire community, whether it's advocates, healthcare professionals, caregivers, community support members, can do a better job in ensuring that older adults and other vulnerable populations aren't compromising themselves. Because it's very easy to kind of get lost in the world of digital media.
Yeah. So for those older adults who are hesitant or fearful of using social media or the online care platforms, there are a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, what are your recommendations for them? How do they get started?
Don't force it. That's as simple as I want to kind of create. I'm not going to fluff it. Just don't force it. It's almost like when I was learning and understanding or working with veterans with mental and physical issues, step by step, little by little, practice session by practice session, logging in to your computer, opening up an app, understanding when to allow or not allow notifications, just minor steps that meet their comfort levels. I think forcing adoption is a big no-no, Pooja, when it comes to understanding that you're not trying to just force a product, you're trying to change culture. My mother, I love her, but she still tells me I missed that button on my phone. And after a number of years from a Motorola Razr, a flip phone, I got her into an iPhone 5 or 6. I'm not sure what it was, but she can use the button to open up the phone, right? That little round button on the iPhone, Pooja, right? That little round physical button. Now she has to stare at it for it to open up. it's almost like your culture is not on anyone's speed or timeline. I think every community, every generation has their own culture and their own ways or adoption strategies. Forcing something is not going to work. So my cousin, for example, bought everything from an Apple Watch to noise cancellation headphones to a very complicated laptop that is not being used by his parents whatsoever, because it's just not what they need. Right? So in many cases, not forcing adoption is the first step in kind of building that trust and rapport, that this is not just a gimmicky, fancy thing, but rather it could be a tool if we find what that purpose is together.
Yeah, I am with your mom on that. So I refuse to upgrade my last phone because of the home button. I was like, I am so used to this home button. And like, I'm pretty tech savvy, but I was just like, I'm so used to this. I don't want to have to relearn my day to day. Right. And my husband, who works in tech, and he's like, you need to upgrade your phone. And this kept going on for like a couple of years. Right. And I finally had to upgrade because the phone was no longer working at the capacity I needed it to work at. Right. And so it slows down. I say it's on purpose, but it slows down over years. And so like I had to upgrade, and it was one of those things where it's like, had my husband forced me to upgrade a few years earlier, like I probably would have, right? But, he kind of accepted the fact that I was like, I'm a person of habit. And so, just like I was used to it. It worked fine at that time. And I was like, I'm not upgrading. I don't want to learn something new, And so even that, like as young or as like tech savvy as I was, I didn't want to learn something new.
Fair,
right.
Fair.
And so you can only think, or imagine for someone who's maybe used these phones for 30, 40 years and not wanting to adopt a completely new phone platform. Right. Especially when you talk about moving from like a Motorola phone to an iPhone, right? It's a big move.
It becomes habitual. It becomes a part of your everyday life. That flip of the phone, the 333-444 text, simply getting through one simple text message will take hours. So my point is, if we don't want our own culture to shift too rapidly, why should we expect individuals who have been living their day-to-day activities or day-to-day lives meaningfully to then have to be forced to adopt fairly quickly? It's almost like asking someone, you can fill out an online application, or there's an option for a printout application. Which one do you prefer? Just having a choice is godsend, Pooja. Like it's almost like it's humane, it's empathetic, it's respectful, it's dignifying to not just have only one option.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even I always say I was born in the wrong era, but like I will still pick a printed handwritten option versus like having to fill something online, even books. Like I prefer to read physical books versus an online book or an ebook,
Okay.
And that comes down to a lot of other things, right? Like the feel of the book, the writing with the pencil. Like I'm very much of a kinesthetic learner. And so I have to write things down for me to actually retain and learn it. Whereas some people are visual and they can just read it and retain it, right?
Yeah. And it goes to a sense of control as well, Pooja, right? In many cases, that input, knowing that there's a physical component to the way that you're interacting with technology or a product. And to many cases, for an older adult, that also could be underlying compensation, right? Just knowing that you're compensating for certain lost functions or diminished functions. I think it's crucial because, again, it's just not everyone has that mental stamina to constantly be flexible and versatile for every single thing. It's energy consuming.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with that, how can we as healthcare providers or community organizations better support these older adults in adopting and using technology at their pace, right, for social connection and healthcare management?
That's a pivotal question across all healthcare disciplines, advocates, caregivers, and so forth. One topic specifically, and there's many, but I think digital literacy is something that should be assessed in any given situation when interacting with a community-focused service or a healthcare-specific service. We talked about the healthcare portals before. We talked about, again, certain activities of daily living that are now digitized, like medication management, financial management, shopping, for example. But digital literacy is assuming that those that the person is literate or has those prerequisite skills to interact with technology. So simply, Pooja, I teach my students who are working in peds or adults to have conversations with parents or caregivers on comfort levels with using digital technology. The very first basic question is there access to digital technology? If there's access to technology, that does not mean that the competency exists. That just means you just have access to technology. And having access may not be consistent. So the second logical question would be, do you have Wi-Fi? How do you get online? Is it paid, or do you rely on free services or free access points? When we talk about disparities and inequities, you're almost like trying to shut down your biases by assuming that everyone has Wi-Fi access or everyone has home internet. Again, we saw from the pandemic, things got very apparent very quickly when it came to the divides, right? Whether digital divides or equity divides across the board and within communities. So for healthcare practitioners and caregivers, I think assessing, asking, and evaluating those digital literacy skills are crucial to not just assuming that you're leaving them with those expectations. So I think that's critical. It's just a bunch of simple questions that maybe no one cared to ask, but I think we should because they take a few minutes, especially before discharge or before ending a session. Again, with also that empathetic tone that is not labeling or stigmatizing or so forth. Because again, something as simple as Wi-Fi, it's not everywhere, or meaning in terms of access.
Right. And it's asking the how questions, right? I learned fairly quickly in the hospital setting to ask, how do you follow up with your providers? How do you create your appointments, right? Make your appointments. How do you manage your medications? And not assuming that they're scheduling their appointments online or that they're scheduling their refills online or having delivery or any of that, right? So then they have the option to tell us what they want to tell us, and also the option to inform us if there is any sort of discrepancy or difficulty with that task, right? That's a very fair point of understanding what their access looks like in the first place. So looking forward, in this digital world that keeps transforming and elevating, what trends do you see in the integration of technology and aging care in general that will impact older adults and their use of social media and online care platforms?
I think what's interesting to me is the digital voice assistant, the idea that a simple voice command, if possible, if intact, if you're able to, can get a lot done without having to physically access or remember the different algorithms and ways to access different types of services online. The digital voice assistant, whether it's Siri or Alexa or whatnot, is becoming very integrated everywhere. It's kind of almost like it allows the older adult to, if possible, if not needing prompts, to control their lives without having to interact physically with the device. I think that trend is huge across multiple consumer populations and also different product lines. But I think it's also a great way to also promote independence, promote, if possible, in my control type of culture, right? Versus having to interact or acquire a device for a specific purpose. I'll give you a quick example. For some weird reason, appliances are becoming extremely digitized, whether it's fridges or stoves or microwaves or coffee makers and so forth. But the integration of voice assistants, I think, is huge. It's almost like having this 50 years from now, this AI that's living with you as a companion across multiple different products. I think for the older adult, it's helpful if they're able to use it. And at the same time, it also kind of creates a companionship that is almost like a support system. We talked about that chatbot before, right, on websites. It's the same concept here. But I think this trend is becoming gigantic, especially also in areas like driving. I recently just watched a couple of videos on YouTube. So almost like vehicles are becoming more Tesla-like across the board, just through using your voice, right, and using voice commands. So to me, I'm looking at that very closely. I think that's going to be a great way to kind of evolutionize the way that we interact with ADLs and instrumental activities in the community as well.
You made a lot of good points there about just the future of technology and how it's going to be so integrated into our day-to-day activities, right? From the simple task of, your alarm goes off, but it might not just be your alarm going off. It's also telling you the day and telling you what you're signed up for, right? And that happens already, right? Our phones already do that for us if we train them to. Or Alexa or Siri will do that for you if you train it to, right? Like, hey, today is this date and you're scheduled for these appointments and it's this time, right? And it'll say that all for you. But then you get into the bathroom and you just have to, say, hey, turn on the lights, turn on the shower, make it hot, right? I just envision a future where just pure voice assistance, you can do everything day to day, right? Hey, it's time for my meds. Can you bring me my meds? Or can you take out the meds that I need?
Yeah.
Or, hey, can you call my doctor and make an appointment?
And then imagine, Pooja, to the question before, caregivers can help us, or almost if we're not able to, now it's almost like having this level of assistance and support with space, right? With maybe a limitation in access. And most caregivers nowadays, just especially with inflation and so forth, time is of the essence. So sometimes not being there for an older adult, this could be the compensation, right? Having pre-set up commands, pre-set up reminders, having established ways to monitor someone at home. Again, the use of camera systems. It reduces the caregiver burden by allowing the older adult to age the way that they want to age while still putting technology into play. So it's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a little bit about equity and access, and I think it's really important to address that as we talk about the future of technology too. How do we as providers, but even just community members, bridge the digital divide to ensure that there's still equitable access to technology and digital resources for older adults, especially those in underserved communities where they might not have the access that we were talking about earlier?
That's a pivotal, powerful question, Pooja. And it's almost like it's a sense of accountability. It's a sense of ethical responsibility as well. I think one way to kind of do it, and it's been done before in multiple communities, but to kind of advocate for spaces and time and resources within a community level, as opposed to a micro one-to-one level of having basic access to information. For example, I'll just give you a quick thing. So where I live, local libraries, whether by township or by counties or by boroughs, have multiple ways of providing resources to older adults, specifically for accessing what they need for their health and well-being, whether it's senior fitness classes, whether it's medication management classes or access classes, or even talks with insurance companies on rights and privileges and so forth. I think as healthcare workers, we need to kind of advocate a little bit more for these resources. Again, for free, but generally available for the larger population. I would have loved if my mother, for example, had supports and understanding what she had access to through her phone or through her healthcare portal without having me to do it for her. The reason why I'm saying that again, that entices or induces caregiver burden, that induces burnout, that induces me having to promote or implement time out of my day for something that should be available across the board. It's almost like promoting health and wellness, but from a preventative model. So integrating technology across the board, but having it at the community level is essential. To be honest, Pooja, most individuals don't want to interact with their healthcare providers all the time. And these questions may not be in the purview or in the scope of most healthcare providers. So now the disparity is who answers these questions. Is it the social worker? Is it the psychologist? Is it the nurse? Where does a caregiver go for tech support? I mean, and it's a simple, it sounds a little minuscule, but it's almost like there should be a geek squad, right? For everything general for when it comes to tech support, but for older adults.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't really think about that. It's like, where do the caregivers go when they need help with some managing tech for their elders, right? Also a great community level grassroots effort, I think, to be able to provide that, right?
Right, which and also in many cases companies could benefit from. It's a mutually beneficial type of interaction. It's like, how else do you push products that are not mainstream for everyone, but are specific for needs? I mean, right, it's like Google creating ways to help individuals or caregivers of older adults access support groups without, too much seeking out, if that makes sense. It should be fairly simple.
I know we talked about family caregivers, providing some of that assistance or oversight for safety and stuff. But what are some ethical considerations, when we're trying to introduce older adults to social media and online care platforms, particularly when it comes to autonomy and informed consent?
I think a few basic strategies would be creating these intentional firewalls between what type of information, what type of confidentiality that the older adult wants, and ways to maintain that type of autonomy or privacy. These firewalls, they're not simply just passwords, ways to authenticate identity, but there's also ways to monitor online activity and also look at threats. I think having active conversations about what threats look like is crucial for online engagement of any sort for any population, but specifically for older adults. Way back, well, even now, Pooja, right? That whole phone scam thing that happens from individuals across multiple countries. Yeah, sure. Here's my social security number. Here's my routing number. Here's my checking account number. This has been proven. It's kind of scary or horrific, but it's much more seamless and much more believable online, especially for older adults who can be taken advantage of. So the point is these firewalls, limiting online activity, vetting platforms that are novel to the older user that might require someone else to just quickly vet and take a look at. Also having security software on these devices or ways to kind of limit access to financial information or personal information, I think is critical. And not to, belittle or to undermine the situation, but the same way we have parental controls for children who should not have access to certain types of platforms and information, there should be something for caregivers with the same level of respect and autonomy that should be afforded to older adults. But in the same line, it kind of creates a sense of community if you're having ways to protect yourself, but still having autonomy at the same time, if that makes sense. For example, I don't know if a website or an app has been vetted. I don't look at just reviews and how many stars. Who are the ones that are using this app? I mean, has it gone through systems of protocols or systems of vetting from more established entities? For example, not to promote them too much, but AARP, for example, if there was some type of entity that could vet a number of apps and platforms for older adults, that'd be great. Because then that takes the accountability off of the user.
Yeah. You've given me a lot to think about. I think there are so many there's so many pieces of this that you want to be mindful of. And I like how you said, yes, not to belittle or undermine them, but we have access to parental controls for children. And I think something similar to that is purely based for security, safety, protective measures, but not taking away their autonomy would be very appropriate, in certain sense.
Yep.
This has been, very eye-opening, and it's given me a lot to think about. And I think as OT providers, I think we're in a really good situation here to really think about this holistically, right? Not just from the individual standpoint, but from the family caregiver standpoint, from the community standpoint, from the healthcare provider standpoint. There's so many angles to how we can help older adults better access their digital environment. And I hope that this opens up a bigger dialogue amongst community members and family caregivers and healthcare providers to look at this and come together to collectively help the population.
And just have conversations. We talk about the occupational profile. We talk about, again, activities of daily living, but we don't think about, well, everything is becoming digitized more and more and more. Even the way that we ask questions, the way that we screen or provide consultation services should be open-minded enough to not just assume that everything is digitized for someone. Again, because it's a culture. Culture adoption can't be forced.
Right, absolutely. Vic, this has been so great. If you had to give one takeaway that you'd like the audience to consider related to digital environment or digital literacy in this world of aging and technological advancement, what would it be?
Keep up. Don't just, I think something that's pivotal is to separate our personal expectations and perceptions with our professional expectations and perceptions. It leaves space for bias. Just because I know how to use an iPhone does not mean that the professional Vic should understand the applicability of the iPhone for what it's needed for in terms of accessibility, communication, and so forth. My point is that sometimes our boundaries of our personal and professional expectations gets blurred. So when it comes to technology and when it comes to older adults, just keep up, but keep up for what the intended purpose is. Ask the right questions. Accept it, but don't force the acceptance, if that makes sense. Accept it for what you need it for, but don't force adoption. Because again, I think that creates a culture of mistrust in many cases. But yeah, Pooja, sorry, this topic is expansive. I want to thank you for having me on this podcast. It's a great platform, especially for everyone, not just OTs, but especially for caregivers. Anyone that's interested in this topic and what they could add to the conversation, it just opens up doors. So thank you so much, Pooja.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Vic, for this enlightening conversation on social media use and care platform navigation for older adults. I really appreciate your time. To my listeners, thank you for tuning into this month's episode with Dr. Vikram Pagpatan. If you would like to learn more about Vic, you can find him on LinkedIn. Sharing expert perspectives on various age-related topics and services can help the community learn how to plan for a healthier future. At Aging Together, we are dedicated to helping you navigate aging together. Thank you for tuning into Aging Together. This podcast is brought to you by Aging Together LLC, a private care consulting practice helping individuals and families age with a plan. This episode was produced by me, Dr. Pooja Patel, in partnership with Natural Eye Media. If you found this episode of Aging Together valuable, we'd love your support in spreading the word. Your likes, shares, and reviews fuel our mission. Don't forget to rate and leave a review wherever you're listening. Your feedback matters. Until next time, take care.